Module 2, Unit 3, Programming and Application Development. In this unit, our objective is to describe what is programming, the organizational techniques, and the logic behind programming. And then categorize types of programming. Ano ba yung mga programming languages na ginagamit? And then let's discuss some advantages and disadvantages of each type, and describe some of the features of application code and object-oriented programming. What are those? And then to describe the ways that how an application is being distributed, how it can be deployed, an application. So when it comes to programming, you will hear the word programming logic. What are the logic behind programming? By the way, when we say programming, ito yung who create the programs, applications, and scripts to automate. These are the people what we call programmers. They have different logics, and when they are using a different programming languages, it comes with different logic as well. So when we say programming, the logic, programming logic is about software development. And when you are developing a software, creating a new application, it's been created in different, it could be created in different languages, and there are applications that can be only written for a particular language. When we say programming languages, this is a word that is used in IT, that it correlates with the type of program na ginamit to develop a software. Different programming software comes with different languages. They have their own languages, and at the same time they have their own code. The coding, it's how you write the program. Like when you are encoding in a paper, it's the same thing. When you're programming, you are coding. That's software development actually. Two things: comes with different software with different languages, and then you have the code. And then when you are creating programs, there's a sequence. Important there is sequence, like when during input, when you process the data, and then the output of the data. So it doesn't comes always na processing muna, and sometimes you jump right away to output. So there's a sequence. That's the logic. It is arranged. It must be clearly defined. Pag malabo kung ano yung output, you cannot actually create a good program that with the correct input. So it comes with a specific input, and to process it as well. Meron ding programming niya paano mo ipaprocess ang input to come up with the right output. And then in programming, one of the tools or methods being used is what they call, or what is called, flow charting. Flow chart. When we say flow charting, in this diagram you would see a sequence of events or conditional situations, or where the entry point or the start point of the program or particular task, all the way down at the end to complete a task. So in general, for example, in this illustration, the start of the program is to clear the display. Of course, para malinis, clear a monitor, clear a display, and then there's it will display a particular instructions, or like for example asking for a number, and then ipaprocess yan. If the asking number is being entered, it is the right one, you store it. If it is not, balik sa instructions. And then when you are storing the number, and then another balik ka ulit sa display whether to enter a number or not. So it is the right number being displayed or not, balik ka ulit sa instructions, and if it is correct, store na naman. So until makuha mo yung desired output with the result of the display with the numbers that being asked, depende sa instructions. So the idea here is how is program is being started, how to create a program, and it starts with flowcharting para meron visualization how programming should take place, how the events should take place, where the input should start or would end, something like that, because it is helpful not only in development but also in debugging or trying to evaluate the efficiency of programming. So it's not just a code, it's not just a language, it's just a sequence of events in a graphical way when you have something in mind that you need to program. So in programming, when it comes to code, merong tinatawag na pseudocode. It is about when you move from one code to another, from one block to another, when you are developing, trying to execute a particular task, may sequence of steps. Then these steps are sometimes expanded or into instructions. These are combined instructions when it comes to writing a code. And then meron din tinatawag na subroutines. Tinatawag na for particular set of code, may mga routine that keeps on executing the same steps until a certain condition is met or a certain value or outcome is met. Subroutines may tinatawag when it comes to writing as a code. And then what are the features of programming? No? Features of programming code. No? Meron tinatawag na syntax. Yung mga command line, no, it's not. It doesn't use that. Meron constructs instead for a particular language. And then subroutines. Ito yung instead of ating particular program na keep on doing the same task, rewriting the same task, many lines of codes, iyon it can be created with a code na executing the same function until you come up with a desired output. Subroutines yun within the code. And then meron din tinatawag na branches and loops, and they call it returns. Like for example, a certain output, you go to this subroutine, a certain loop, and then you go to another loop. May mga combination of subroutines or some interrelated codes that are between subroutines. It gives a value or return when we say return in programming. And then meron din tinatawag na conditional statements. These are type of programming na what happens, so you do this and do that. If this is the situation, we do this. Conditional. Yung mga tinatawag na if then, mga if, those are conditional statements. Mga programming codes to do something until a certain condition, no, to do a particular condition. They call it statement because it's a combination of statements and codes. And then variables. May mga variables. These are for data manipulation, for data storing. This how to present characters, how to distinguish from characters to commands. Those are the things. Variables. It's either text or alphanumeric. And then may functions. Ito yung either functions just like plus, minus, equals to execute. When you're combining, when you are subdividing, those mathematical functions actually. And then meron ding user interface. User interface, these are actually, diba, mga user ng applications or mga programmer itself. How to enter the codes, how to display a code, how to how the language is being presented. May mga tools then in running code, debugging a code, and then may mga shortcuts. Those are user interface, either keystrokes or with window clicks. And then it's also actually, I would say, one of the practices in programming, kailangan may comments. These are instructions or reminders or additional information. What is this subroutines or what is this code, a particular line of code is all about. because there are codes that looks exactly the same but works differently. And pag marami na rin sa mga programs that created many programming, I mean, there's a long line of code, or have done many applications already. I mean, that's one way to remind a programmer, like mga notes about the statements or conditions that you created when you're programming. Hindi pinaprocess yan. And then, when it comes to programming, guys, meron din tinatawag, as I mentioned earlier, merong programming languages. These are languages particular to a particular programming software that you use. When we say languages, may mga sariling instructions, may mga sariling variables, may mga sariling routines or conditions, a particular program. In That's how you describe it. That's the language of a particular software you're using in developing an applications. So it depends actually what type of programmer you are, or what kind of program you are writing. Kung high level, low level, and sometimes may mga languages that are really advanced. It defines you as a programmer, how experienced you are and how complicated the programming is. May mga, multiple routines. I mean, really, and data manipulations or interfacing. So that comes with programming languages. And then what type of device of users you will be using. So meron ba mga handheld, portable, no, okay, mga network devices or computers that are joined together or integrated together. May mga ganon na type of programming languages that are used. And then different languages, of course, different variables, different syntax. Not the same syntax, the same coding works with a different programming software. Para ano yun, communication or people, different language, they have different syntax, they have different, every languages have their own formats. Those, the same analogy, the same context, it's not interchangeable. The language you use, that you use from a different program, it cannot be used on another programming language. So, ano ba yung mga programming languages that we're talking about that comes with different format, different code, different syntaxes, different development environment? Merong Java, Python. These are programming languages. These are actually programming software with different languages. They have different syntaxes. There are people who are good in Python or doesn't use JavaScript. Meron naman, they are, are proficient in C Sharp, but they don't use C++, PHP, Perl. May mga application, meron mga database, different kind of purpose. This comes with different programming languages, with different programming vendors, or programming software that they use. Now, in programming, meron din tinatawag na compiling and interpreted languages. When we say compiled languages, ito yung packed. These are codes that being packed to, as an application. Ito yung compiled program to be executed. These are codes actually being transformed into a binary file so that the machine or the computer will be able to execute it. And then a programming code regardless of the programming language that is converted to a machine code. And then there are, it runs quickly. Mga example ng software na it runs quickly with a particular platform. Windows, Linux, comes with different languages. And then these are the applications: C Sharp, C++, from C actually in the early days, and then meron COBOL, and then Pascal. These are for compiling that is used. And then meron naman yung mga for creating scripts, for example. It's interpreted languages. It's like an interpreter, yung code to be interpreted by different platform. Like for example, operating system, a different operating system, o kaya virtual machines running on an OS. And then meron ding programming compiled to a bytecode instead of bits. And then it's the same thing, merong interpreter, I mean, for machine code, but using a byte. And then it's slower because may middleman, may interpreter. It doesn't go directly in executing. It doesn't go directly as a machine code para to execute. Meron pang translator, ibig sabihin. So it's like people communicating with different languages. May interpreter, nakabagal. But actually, not in our own senses, but in machine time or in programming time. And then the software that's used that you can say as considered as interpreted languages are Java, JavaScript, Perl, and Python. Now, meron din tinatawag na sa language, programming languages like query, assembly, and markup languages. What are these? Well, let's start with query languages. Query, from the word itself, is for queuing. Ito yung something asking or feeding. No? These are usually used in database. When you are retrieving data, that's a query. That's a query that taking out something from the database. As you should know by now, database is also a software, di ba? It's a compilation of information. Kaya nga database. And then, usually sa database, ayun yung tinatawag na SQL. As how you read, this is how you read it, no? SQL. If you gusto mo ng ganon, you can do that as well. But SQL stands for Structured Query Language. SQL means ang tawag dyan. Maraming application, maraming programming languages na SQL. Like for example, MySQL, okay, Microsoft itself, and then Oracle. Those are programs that uses query languages. Wow. Now, meron din, when we say assembly language, this is more on low level. These are actually from machine code to human readable text, like alphanumeric numbers, no? But these are actually translated to machine code. These are actual programming codes to execute a particular that machine uses to execute a task. And then markup languages. Alam niyo tinatang na web pages, no, browsers. Those are applications din, di ba? Those are software. Those are created by programmers in this format, in HTML. Ang tawag dyan, hypertext markup language. This is the language. It comes with different set of codes, instructions, variables. And then, the same thing with XML. Ito yung markup languages ang tawag doon. Those are the things. No, actually, because it tags a document, it tags an image to create a particular page or structure with corresponding meaning or links, for example. And then, meron ding tinatawag na identifiers. Identifiers like, these are how to identify data. Either to store it, or to execute it. And then, for example, to be distributed as well, either as a variables. You have to identify if the data is for, something that a program can use to execute, or something that program to store, or represent a particular information. And then meron din tinatawag na constant that this value is always the same regardless of what kind of execution or coding. It doesn't change. So identifiers is either, as a variable or a constant. And then, meron din tinatawag na containers sa programming. Identifiers to reference multiple elements. These are within the content, within an array actually, I'm trying to say, or container, yung lalagyan. Let's say lalagyan. Then may mga elements doon, may mga identifier doon. And then arrays is actually, it's the container that contains, it's actually, it's like a cup where you put all the elements where the numbers or variables are being stored, and an array is defined either by a dimension, no, by single or multi-dimensional. And then vectors, these are values that comes with a certain direction, and that could grow or shrink. No, these are data or variables. And then sa programming, itong subroutines that we mentioned earlier, merong branches and loops that actually do a particular task within that is part of a bigger task or bigger routine. So, ano ba yung makikita sa mga branches na I mentioned earlier, mga if-then statement, di ba? So, these are conditional branches to execute a particular function or an output. And then, branches in a sense na pag na-reach yung condition, magpo-proceed to the next code or to the next routine. And then meron din tinatawag na loops. Loops in a sense that a function is repeated until a certain condition is met. Like ang mga command dyan, like for or next, do, and while. Ibig sabihin, you do this while until then. Parang ganun. For, like this is the variable, and then next is you do this, like naga-append. So loops, it keeps on executing the same function until you reach a condition, you go to the next routine. Yung branches kasi, pag na-meet yung certain condition, it's not repeating sequence of codes. That's the difference, no, in loops and branches. So, meron din tinatawag na operators. Operators, these are not people, no? These are mathematical operators like equal or less than, greater than. If you are comparing variable A to variable B, either greater than or equal or less than, those are operators. This is what they use. This is what programmers use in comparing variables. And then, may mga logical operators. What's the difference? No, logical is relational, something like or combining, like A and B or A or only or X or. Ibig sabihin ng X or, if either condition is true but not both, then the whole statement is true. So pag merong ganitong operator, this is the condition being met or being executed. Logical, it does something to represent a routine either as true or false. So, meron din tinatawag na sa programming, there are procedures and functions that are used for that you need to specify for comments, the blocks of codes, and then the function of return value. Those are to be described, and noted, and then in comments, actually, that's why those are readable. Actually, lahat ng code is readable, but these are part of the code that is not executed by compiler interpreter. Hindi siya for comparison, hindi siya for logical function, hindi siya for like for plus or minus. These are for documentation, as mentioned, to remind you. And pag meron inumpisahan ng slash or dito a remark, a number, or apostrophe, it's a comment. And it's not part of a code that execute a certain routine. And then, meron din tinatawag na object-oriented programming. This is a programming software that actually, instead of lines of words and instructions, it represented by objects or things. So these things interacts either to open a menu or to represent another pop-up window. Those are objects, object programming, and it comes with properties like and characteristics and attributes and methods, where to bring this, what to do with this, instead of writing all of those with that requires a lot of codes. It is represented by an object instead. And then meron tinatawag na scripting language Scripting in a sense na you have to run a multiple command or routine on a single instruction or a single on a single command or single batch. Usually ginagamit yan sa automation like repeated tasks like copying backups, deleting files, or generating data or interfacing with other applications. Scripting is also programming, but for the purpose of short, quick executions that doesn't have to be part of a particular application with specific codes. So it could be a command between two programs, a combination of to run a combined program. You do it externally, and that scripts, no? And then, yan, in my example, yung mga batch files to run on a regular basis on a particular task. An example ng scripting languages in Windows is we call it PowerShell or VBScript. And then sa Linux, Bash, no? Ang tawag doon. Now, when programming, platform is very important. Application platforms, whether in Windows or Linux, those are platforms where to write the code, and it comes with a specific coding. Meron din tinatawag na single platform. It runs only a particular platform like Windows or Linux, or meron tinatawag cross-platform. You can run between between Linux or Windows or Mac OS. Meron naman, lalo na Mac OS. It's a single maraming software that only runs on Apple. So for in this example, you have a browser that opens on Word, and then meron naman that opens on online or a different word processor na, for example, created by Google, di ba? And then meron naman din for web applications na platform. That those are the things na you can only run online. You cannot run it on any or locally on Windows or Linux or Mac OS. Web applications lang. And then there are many ways to, deliver applications. Like for example, where are you going to install it? Saan mo gagamitin yan? So it is just like in the previous unit, when you are installing a software, no, it's installing locally. So it only runs on a local computer, local installation. And then all the information are saved locally. So doesn't have to be connected on the network, and it doesn't send or receive information from the network. Yun ang local purpose, mga local application that are installed locally. And then you can also there are programs that can be delivered through network, meaning a server, a client, where the server has all the source or the source code, or where all the programming are being kept, and then it has to be accessed through the network by a client and to execute it. Or sometimes, to say it differently, merong application that is remote from your computer that you're using, and it's na-install locally. And then there are information either can be stored locally or most of the times stored in the network. You are working in computer, but the information you're saving is actually not on your computer, it's on your server, or it's on the central server. Of course, kailangan ng network connection. But it has to be cleared na it's only within the organization or within the same network. It doesn't have to be with internet access. Ito yung tinatawag na pag may internet access, yung cloud hosted or online, where you save your files in a cloud, or where you access the files in a cloud, like in a Google Drive, doon mo binuksan yung Word, doon ka nagtatype, doon na save. So cloud hosted yon. And definitely, it is network or standalone that connects to the internet. So in this unit, it is recommended in order for you to be familiar, recommended but not mandatory to perform certain activities, lab activities like scripting. Like in Windows, if you have one, try to write a script like how to copy, paste, delete a file, or if you want to more advanced, that's better. But you don't have to be. It's a stepping stone when it comes to understand what scripting. It is that's why it is recommended. And then try to use a programming tools. Depends on application that you're using. Like for example, kung you don't have to be a machine language application for programming tool to create a particular mathematical task. You can do that. So in this unit, we describe programming organizational techniques and logics, and we categorize different programming languages, the advantages between one and the other, and then describe some application code and object-oriented programming. And then we describe also, lastly, the applications, how it can be deployed from local to network and online or to the cloud. I hope this has been informative to you. See you on the next unit. Thank you.